Good afternoon,
Good
and
afternoon.
and welcome to this session being hosted by Integrated Mountain Initiative, IMI. I'm Sushil Ramola. This session is being streamed live on Facebook and YouTube. So please feel free to invite others and request them to watch this. IMI holds an annual event called Meet of the Mountain States, which is in the month of February, March every year. Unfortunately, this year we were not able to hold it. So this is an event which is in a way replacing that. But let me talk a little bit about Integrated Mountain Initiative. It's a civil society platform where we have people from across the Indian Himalayan region representing leaders from various walks of life, politics, civil society, research, government, and so on, coming together to deal with the complex issues of our mountain regions, issues such as climate change, livelihoods, water, disasters, sustainable cities. And all of us know that these issues are even more complex than in the rest of the country in the mountain states. And we need to have very, very distinct approaches to deal with them. So IMI has been doing this work for many years, but for the last couple of years, we have been focusing on youth through livelihoods and entrepreneurship, because we realize that in the mountain regions, it's very difficult to find meaningful employment. And that becomes even more complex now post-COVID. So we've been focusing on that issue and dealing with it. And this event was to come together to do that. But post-COVID, I think issues have changed, as all of us know. COVID-19 has become kind of a black hole for all conversations around the world. But at the same time, it's leading to potentially, I feel, tectonic shifts in terms of the way we are going to face the future. And our mountain regions definitely are impacted, in my view, very, very strongly by this. Issues such as how will shift towards adopting new technologies, such as these webinars, and also the technologies at the grassroots change. How will we look at livelihoods differently, because they have to become local, they have to focus more on women. And I think technology provides us an opportunity to focus on women and, on youth and other things, because it's an opportunity for all of us to do that. So to deal with these issues, we had, set up our first webinar on 1st of May, which was to deal with the issues and challenges of livelihoods in the mountain regions post-COVID. And some of you may have attended that. That was kind of a preamble to this more focused second session, which is focusing especially on how do we build youth entrepreneurship, engaging in all sectors which are relevant for our mountain regions. May I request people to put their phones on mute, because it may be disturbing others. So I think in this scenario, I think we need to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem and engaging everyone. And in that context, we have a need to bring the market, the communities, the technologies, the capabilities, the finance all together. And in this session, we are fortunate that we have a set of panelists who bring in all these expertise from different walks of life, and hopefully we can integrate all these together to come up with meaningful solutions for moving forward. Apart from the galaxy of panelists, we also are fortunate that we have our legislators, our uh, our council members present here who have been dealing with these issues since the time IMI was started. And our council members are all leaders from different walks of life, from government, politics, civil society, entrepreneurship, and so on. So, so with this, I would like to hand over the proceedings to Mr. P.D. Rai. But before I do that, let me also make a housekeeping announcement that we would encourage people to raise questions through the Q&A box available. And even though the time limitation may not allow us to answer all the questions through the panelists, we'll take them down and we'll try to respond to them as we move forward. So over to you, Mr. Rai.
Sushil, and that was a very good preamble, which means that we really have. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, which means that basically we started off on the first with a webinar which really looked at what we can do for the mountains, how do we build resilience, and in that we also had an excellent panel. And we got, and the idea is that we have two very interesting externalities right now. Not interesting, I mean, externalities. One is, of course, the climate change, which has been with us and leading to more and more, problematics within the Indian Himalayan mountain region, such as disasters, and compounded by all kinds of other issues which relate to livelihoods. And the second and more immediate, which I think everybody now will factor in, even as our panelists, the pandemic and its immediacy in terms of what responses have happened. So people have moved back to villages in the mountains. Migration and reverse migration now is truly something which has happened. And we know that if that has led to quite a few, other problematics in the villages, which means that more mouths to feed, less work, and so on and so forth. So I would just like to request the panelists, to take both these considerations, these two major pressures on the mountain systems, as we look at ways and means of building the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the mountain regions. Now, I hope, has Mr. Vijay Mahajan joined? Vijay?
He hasn't joined in, sir. We can continue.
Okay. So, since Mr. Vijay Mahajan hasn't joined, I think last time, of course, Mr. Mahajan had talked a lot about how we can actually tackle some of the issues in the mountain regions, and amongst that, he had really spoken about how we take this as an opportunity to build more resilience through the green route, and he called it the GDP route, which is green, digital, and using digital, because even in the mountain areas now, digital connectivity is fairly good, but still needs a lot of work. And then P for prosperity. And he used another acronym called Well Done, in which, from water all the way to land, and even E as e-commerce, some things that we need to really work on. So with that, may I then request, I would now request I would request Srikanth. Srikanth, I think we had circulated, so I will not introduce the speakers, but will you like to speak about how we can think of layering the Indian Himalayan, layering our IHC with different kinds of incubation centers, if you think, and rethinking some of the stuff that you have already been doing, how those things can really work in the mountain areas. So over to you, Shrikant. And when Vijay comes, then we can take his views as well.
Thank you, PD. Thank you,
Yeah.
Sushil.
Yeah,
And
I have just got in touch with Mr. Mahajan. He is joining. Yeah.
so do you want him to start first?
No. I think
Okay.
we can go. Yeah.
So thank you. I will pick up on the theme of livelihoods, but I'm going to start with a story of my favorite startup across all the incubators that I'm involved with. I'm on the board of several incubators and advisory bodies, and I meet hundreds of startups. But there is this one startup. This one is not in the Himalayan region, but it has many messages for us in the Himalayan region. He has a nickname now called Goat Wala Kalyan. He's called Goat Wala Kalyan because he has built a business which generates several thousand livelihoods now simply by leveraging an artificial insemination technique for black Bengal goats in Bengal. What he did was he worked with a government lab in Mathura to create an artificial insemination technique for black Bengal goats whose population is declining. Bengal is the biggest goat meat consuming state in the country. Now, in order to get the population back on track, he started using this insemination technique. But that is not what is interesting. What is interesting is the kind of livelihoods he's created with this. He said he's built this insemination semen farm in Singur in West Bengal. Singur is famous for many other reasons, but in this case, he's based there. But how do you take this insemination to a small goat farmer in a village in Bengal? So he has created a network of micro entrepreneurs. These are unemployed youth in villages who come and take in cryogenic cans the semen, and they go out. They're trained to inject it in the goat in order to get the artificial insemination at work. They buy each dose at 30 rupees. They sell it at 100 rupees. There are thousands of youth now who make close to 10,000 rupees a month simply on delivering artificial insemination to goat farmers across Bengal. Look at the outcome. Healthy goats, the goat rearing farmer makes more money. Thousands of youth who take the thing to the farmer are getting livelihoods. It's a very, very virtuous cycle that he's created. And at the heart of it, there is only a small 25 lakh investment that he got from the incubator, IIM Calcutta Innovation Park. Look at the equation. 25 lakhs of investment, 1,000 jobs. It's only 2,500 rupee investment per job. Compares very favorably with any government scheme in the country. And that's why it's my favorite example. The reason I keep bringing it back is that this is a model that can be taken to any part of the country, especially now when the focus is even more so on livelihoods for all the reasons that you described, PD. So my first thought is that any incubator that we create or incubation model that we create in the Himalayan region has to create sustainable businesses that create thousands of livelihoods. And I can take the goat example to Himalayan region. Take livestock, provides close to 8% livelihoods to about 8% of India's population. Take J&K and Himachal, sheep rearing is big. Mules, J&K is big. Mithun, which is a semi-wild bovine, Arunachal is big. So across the Himalayan region, livestock is important. And I see this as a way of generating livelihood by simply replicating Gotwala Kalyan's model. And I can think of similar models working in food processing, handicraft, sustainable tourism, etc. So my first message is that any incubator in the Himalayan region has to create livelihoods as the primary focus, not revenue, not valuation, nothing else. So therefore, we cannot replicate the incubation model from a large metro or a large incubator. In a Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi, the focus of an incubator is, can I create hundreds of startups? How much of funding can I get for them from government sources? Our model in the Himalayan region has to be completely different. The only metric that matters is, are my startups creating livelihoods? They are not startups that need crores of funding. But with small amounts of funding and high quality mentoring, these startups can create hundreds of jobs. So don't replicate big city incubation models in the Himalayan region is my message number 2. The third message is that resources will always be limited, particularly now when so much of money has gone in fighting COVID. Government will not have money, others will not have money. We need a smarter model if you set up incubators in the Himalayan region. A smarter model where we leverage partnerships, we leverage many different kinds of stakeholders. And let me list down a couple of such partners and stakeholders. One is government R&D centers and academic institutions. CSIR, IHR, Uttarakhand has a IVRI. There are IITs, there are NITs in all these states. They are sources of free R&D for our incubators and startups. That is available for the taking, and we must leverage that. Second, and this is exceedingly important, and this is why a lot of the incubators in smaller locations fail, startups at incubators need hand-holding. They can't learn to run or fly on their own. They need local mentors. They need local angel investors. And this requires effort. How do you find locals who can believe in incubation and support it? And I have one answer for that, which I'll come shortly. But I'm emphasizing the point that in the absence of resources, leveraging government, engineering colleges, local rich people is exceedingly important. Fourth is collaboration. We cannot have people replicating, reinventing the wheel. If there is a successful model in Assam or Bengal, can I bring it to Ladakh? Can I bring it to Himachal? Can I bring it to Sikkim? I'll give you an example. Just recently, there is a fairly early stage but successful model called Brahmaputra Fables in the Northeast, which is an attempt to aggregate all the craftsmen and artisans in the Northeastern region to offer them an e-commerce platform. I saw a similar group of people trying to do in Ladakh called Ladakh Basket. I felt there was an opportunity for two of them to talk to each other, learn from each other, combine resources. So this is going to be increasingly the norm. The next message I'd like to leave is that we need to find a home for an incubator, which is long-term. And the best home would be an academic institution or a government R&D institution, which has a long-term institutional value. But one condition, it needs a visionary director and a professor in charge who believes in this and will support it full-time. And you need a full-time CEO. You can't just have a building and put a certain number of startups there and hope that they will succeed. You need a visionary director, a professor in charge who will do it. The last message I want to leave is tap into the diaspora. And this is exceedingly important. Uttarakhand, Himachal, J&K, Arunachal, all these places have diaspora which have gone elsewhere in the world. They're happy to come back and contribute. In some cases, they'll come back as a CEO and run the incubator also. They will bring contacts, they will bring mentors, they will bring money. So that's my closing message. Focus on livelihoods. In the absence of resources, leverage government, leverage partnership, bring a passionate CEO. That's the way to make a successful incubator in the Himalayan region. Thanks, PD. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you, Sri. That was really, and I mean, really moving and I think very inspirational. Can I bring in Mr. Vijay Mahajan, who was supposed to be our opening batsman? Mr. Mahajan, in your absence, I did talk a little bit about GDP and the well done, and we'd like you to go from there because the conditions have changed. This is a far more, the conditions that have forced us to move into this platform. So can you take the floor, please? Vijay?
First of all, my apologies, Mr. Chairman. I somehow mistook that this is going to start at 5, not at 4, so I was taking a nap till Sushil woke me up. But anyway, since you've covered the point about well done, and I did catch the last few minutes of what Srikanth was saying, and thank you, Srikanth, very inspiring. I'd like to go to a slightly lower end of entrepreneurship than what was implied in Srikant's message. While I very much endorse that we need that type of enterprise also for the mountains, the new generation high-tech enterprise, which would employ hopefully a few hundred people apiece, and would have capital employed in the range of maybe tens of crores, if not more. But let's first of all look at the fact that all over India, as per the economic census 2012, there were about 67 million non-farm or non-agricultural enterprises. And out of that, nearly 85% were what are called own account enterprises. That is, they had no employees. It was either self or at best a part-time family member working. There was no paid employee. So in other words, we're talking of not micro, not even nano, but really pico enterprises, PICO. So now there's no reason for me to believe that the mountains would have, an entrepreneurial stock or an opportunity stock which would support a different, sort of distribution of enterprise ecosystem there. So a large number of what we're calling enterprises in India and definitely in the mountains would have to be really very small. They are typically what we otherwise call self-employed businesses. And if that is so, then we need to think about it differently. The good thing is that it makes the ability to garner resources for this and to have candidates who will become entrepreneurs for this go up dramatically. The bad thing is that in general, own account enterprises do not generate too much employment for other than the person working there or his or her family members. So these are the trade-offs that we have to do. At the same time, I'm not discounting that we should take the higher level of enterprises. Now, having said this, what sectors would these own account enterprises be? And that's where the well-done framework fits in very well. The mountain economies are very well endowed. Mountain ecologies are very well endowed with water which falls from the skies. It's very well endowed with solar insulation, solar energy. So, many, of course, you have to be on the right side of the slope. I recognize that. But there are enough parts of the mountains which are on the right side of the slope. Then there is lots and lots of land, though it is slopy and not necessarily perfect for agriculture. But we have to start thinking of land as not only for crop cultivation, and therefore the need for expensive terracing and so on that has been going on. You can think of it as land for horticultural crops, for plantations, forestry, and so forth. And then there's the next tail is livestock. So all of these are amenable to well-known, understandable forms of self-employment and doable. But the other four, which is the digital skills-based, requiring some degree of organizing, whether in a self-help group or a farmer-producer company or a local cooperative or a micro-franchise, non-farm activities, and which require e-commerce. That is where the demand is not local, but you're really catering to an external market. That's the new generation, and that's where some of what Srikant said, some of those skills would necessarily be useful. But this is where we should use the returning migrant as a blessing, because the returning migrant, unlike the persons who stayed back, the returning migrant has had exposure to the world outside, has lived in understandably more difficult conditions, has lived with competition, with hostility, has learned how to deal with information, often has some digital skills. One of my friends from Chhattisgarh used the term WhatsAppia. So WhatsAppia is a guy who has learned to use WhatsApp, and I think that's itself is a very important skill to have. And so this second category can do the digital enterprises, non-farm enterprises, which require some degree of organizing and some degree of e-commerce, and probably a higher level of capital employed. So if you ask me, the first kind, the water, energy, land and livelihood type of enterprises could start with as little as 1 lakh rupee per entrepreneur, whereas the ones related at the next level are more in the range of 2 to 5 lakhs per entrepreneur. Now, the first will generate employment only for the person employed and his family members maximum. Second one may have 1 or 2 workers, but neither of them are the kind which will generate large number of wage employment for a large number of people just seeking jobs. So that issue still has to be taken care of. And there I hope some of the ideas that Srikanth suggested, but one particular one that I want to just give an example of, which is that in a talk today, the former Chief Economic Advisor of India, Professor Kaushik Basu, said 2 sectors will certainly take off in a big way after COVID. One is health sector, and the other is the outsourcing sector. And according to me, if something is to be outsourced from San Francisco to Bangalore, it might as well be outsourced from San Francisco to Gangtok. Because the distance is not the issue. It is really the availability of connectivity and the availability of the satellite signal. And that has increasingly become better, but some amount of infrastructure has to be put in every major mountain town. And we should go for a large number of digital jobs, whether it is medical transcription, whether it is offline accounting, whether it is data analytics. A lot of those things can generate number of jobs with only one entrepreneur and maybe 30, 40, 50, even 100 workers. Having said this, Mr. Chairman, if I have another minute, I want to just...
Yeah, just a minute, 1 minute.
Yeah, so the question is, where will the finance for all of this come? And while the finance for all of this, for the higher end would naturally have to come from, the venture capital type of structures. But the first 2 categories that I talked about, the own account enterprise of less than 1 lakh rupee investment and the enterprise of about 2 to 5 lakh rupees, a lot of that can actually just come from Mudra loans. And now that the government has announced this package and has, made it clear that as much as 3 lakh crores worth of loans would be guaranteed, though a lot of it is for topping up the working capital of existing borrowers, but there will be some additional Mudra loans. And for once, the maturity structure of this loan is very interesting. It's got a 1-year moratorium completely, and then a 4-year repayment structure, which is long enough to take care of the cash flow problems of any startup, so that you don't. So in a sense, this is a medium-term loan, almost structured as equity. And though ideally I would have liked to have micro equity, but that's a different instrument, hard to put in place so quickly. So this is the big opportunity that we should go after. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the granularity you brought today in the different segments, I think that's excellent by way of insight. And hopefully there's a lot of takeaway from that. Next, I would like to bring in Karthik. So Karthik, the pandemic has ensured that the government of India and the state governments dig deep into their pockets, as has already been mentioned by Vijay. Given that the banks and financial institutions have always been a stumbling block to entrepreneurial ventures, how sanguine are you about the new thinking that needs to be developed among young people to get back on the feet? What will be your prescription under such circumstances? And can we develop new kinds of funding mechanisms or special purpose vehicles, which have already been kind of talked about, but I hope you can get into more detail. Thank you. Karthik, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, sir. It's a pleasure, firstly, to be here. And I just wanted to thank IMI and all of you for inviting me. So just to give a brief context, I think Mr. Mahajan has already spoken about this in terms of the practice of what it looks like on the ground, but maybe just to give a little bit of a theoretical context. So I work in the field of social business and impact investing. And broadly speaking, that is something of enormous relevance to the mountain states of India, right? Because what is impact investing? It's basically bringing in different types of capital, both philanthropic capital or commercial capital, but private capital. So capital that complements the government, and really focusing that on two objectives: either direct service delivery to low-income populations or enhancing their livelihoods or their incomes. But in either case, the focus is on the underserved. So you could define that as income, you could define that as demographic, and you could certainly define that as geographic exclusion. So there have been multiple initiatives here. And certainly, given the realities of COVID and the lockdown, the health imperative as well as the socioeconomic imperative that's created by the lockdown, which I think all of us are familiar with, and these issues that have been raised of reverse migration, people being stuck in place, the importance of digital access, and that really enabling a new kind of jobs. Long and short of it is, it makes impact investing and social entrepreneurship, and overall, this notion of conscious capitalism, it sounds very philosophical, more relevant. So what I'll quickly try to do over the course of some slides, which I've been asked to share, is just give a analytical understanding of this concept. And I'll try to do this in maybe 5-6 minutes, and we'll share this presentation afterwards. So I won't go through all the details. So Prerna, if you don't mind, we can just quickly go ahead. So very quickly, just wanted to introduce what Asha Impact is. Asha Impact is an impact investment organization, which basically channels capital from business leaders, wealthy HNIs, domestic capital into social enterprises, which is what we call impact investments. But we also have a not-for-profit model, which is a not-for-profit organization, which basically says that, the government is ultimately the largest impact investor. So how do you catalyze the right policy changes and, build the ecosystem? So we do both of these activities. You can go to the next slide, please. And this is just another way of looking at it, and maybe a thought process about the theory of change, that there's many, many approaches, right? There's a grassroots approach, there's policy specialists, there's technical specialists, and so forth. What folks like us, and this is a much larger industry, I'm just one very small example of it. Mr. Mahajan is intimately familiar with this. He's helped create this industry with larger organizations. What are we trying to do? Which is basically trying to bring, to the extent possible, commercial capital and blended capital to bring to bear, right? So that's number one. And second is, again, on policy, not blue sky thinking. Like, there's much more, educated policy specialists for every single sector. But to really figure out what are those bottlenecks which are actionable and which would result in additional capital and basically more market-based scalability of some of these models. So specific regulatory issues on the ground, of which there are many. Next slide, please. And just, since you've asked me to articulate some of the different buckets of capital, I wanted to just emphasize this, that impact investing, this word sometimes confuses people because it encompasses a range. So if you look on the left side of that, there's strategic philanthropy or blended finance, which is basically blending philanthropy and commercial capital in different kind of structures. A classic structure would be a risk guarantee, And on the right side, ESG, SRI, and so forth, you often have large commercial investors who are doing, ESG compliant investing. So these are different buckets, across that risk return spectrum, and different capital providers are in different areas. And all of these would be relevant to the northeastern states. And of course, in the center, and this in my opinion are the most relevant, is the core of what we call impact investors, which are people who are trying to do both, who are saying our only objective is to invest in businesses which are helping society, but because of our raison d'etre is to also do this in a commercially sustainable manner. So it's a complement to traditional philanthropy. Next, please. And this is, again, just trying to show maybe an example of the 8 or 9 key sectors that this applies in, right? And most of these have to do with service delivery. The basic things that someone needs to live a healthy, dignified, productive life. What we call needs, not wants. And many startups in the larger ecosystem are focused on those wants for people like us. But these are basic needs: access to education, healthcare, energy, water, sanitation, and so forth. The financial inclusion is actually more of a cross-cutting vertical because it can apply to all of them. So financial inclusion should really be seen as like a third of the whole pillar. And then, of course, on the livelihood side, traditionally agriculture has played a very important role, but you have a lot of interesting developments now because you also have to think about the urban poor, and particularly in this context, think about logistics, think about mobility, think about all those folks who are out there delivering your services. So this is, I won't go too much into the next slide. This is basically showing that you can look at this from a development lens. And if you look at the subtext here under these same sectors, this is essentially what one is trying to do, right? Which is to bring capital to bear, you have to show that there's some level of inherent scalability that's there. And within a larger sector like education or healthcare or what have you, at least if you want to bring large scale capital, you have to show that these are the specific subsectors or the business models or the strategies that could potentially work to deliver the impact and the returns. So this is an example of that. And I'm going to end with this. And I know there's a lot of technical stuff on this slide, but basically if someone asked the question, what is constraining the growth of our industry, which is the development finance capital industry? So there's 3 issues. One is this matching of risk and return, right? Every startup, I'm calling it startups, but it could be a micro enterprise, a pico enterprise, or a nano enterprise, or a not-for-profit. Every enterprise that needs to raise capital has different degrees of impact, and different investors, as we discussed, also have different orientations towards impact. So that has to match. And the other area, as kind of Vijay also alluded to, is that some of these sectors are more developed. In financial inclusion, you have a value chain. You have market infrastructure, which has been built through the efforts of many people and evolution of time, from a credit bureau to banking correspondence and what have you. A sector like water and sanitation or agriculture doesn't have that yet. So again, investors are looking at that. And the entrepreneurs who are in that challenging area to develop those business models are also facing that constraint. So the risk appetite of the investor, that's the job of people like me and others to bring that capital to the table. The second bucket is what is the core of this discussion, which is how do we enhance the entrepreneurial capacity of incubators and of startups in mountain regions. And there are multiple initiatives happening here. I've been associated with Naropa Fellowship, right? Which is a wonderful idea to basically build a high quality educational institute, in this case in Leh Ladakh, both to incent local students to study there, to work there. And this is a high quality, Ashoka University style education. And also to bring people from the rest of India, put them in groups, one person from the mainland, if you may, and one person from the mountains, and have them do joint ventures together. So, there's an enormous need for building that local entrepreneurial capacity. One small idea I want to throw into the mix there, which has not been said, is local angel networks, right? Especially for the pico and nano stuff. So there's been initiatives like this. So let's say in Odisha, you've got 100 local businessmen who can come together with a network, who could support the startups in that network, which may be harder for a smaller entrepreneur there to reach, people in other cities. And the last element here is obviously regulation. And regulation is often not more complex than just ease of doing business, and specifically ease of doing business, access to capital. As again, Mr. Mahajan was talking about Mudra and the SME schemes for small and medium enterprises, right? Equity or risk capital, which is what investors bring, frankly, should only apply to 5-10% of companies who are very high growth and very commercial and so forth. Most companies should be able to leverage their own funds or working capital and debt, and that is sadly very, very constrained. So that is really the key. If you had that local ecosystem, you had some impact investors who are interested in coming into these regions, and you had some specific regulatory enablements in these regions, including focusing on the startup sector. Many of these Northeastern governments have specific funds for startup budgets and have spoken about incubating different initiatives, but not many initiatives have actually taken off. So it's a question of these, like a tri-sector approach, that the civil society, the government, and the private sector, if they all come together, then these are the three basic major challenges that need to be addressed. So I'll pause there. I'm sorry if that was a bit too theoretical, but I just thought that may be helpful to share the perspective of an investor in building entrepreneurial ecosystems.
Yeah, though theoretical, I think excellent kind of work. And I think it gives us a lot of food for thought in terms of what kind of, I know, how do we construct some of this kind of, mechanisms within the IHR. And thank you so much for this presentation. Next is Saurabh. Saurabh, I think, one of the key elements is, I think, markets. I think we have to develop links with the markets and to get the price and the product right. And under the present scenario, there is also a cry for Swadeshi, self-reliance. And the states, and in the states, there's a bigger thinking of localization. I mean, this is again something that we've been hearing. It is great for our planet because, the carbon footprints will definitely go down. But how realistic is this? And then what are your thoughts on market linkages? Or also, to give an example, how can organic produce like millets and others move out of the IHR and add value to the rest of India?
Okay.
Over to you, Saurabh.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir. Can you hear me well? Is my voice audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me share, first of all, where is it that I'm coming from? I think it's important to understand the messenger before, people listen to the message. I've been working in Himalayan region with entrepreneurs for last about 5 years now, and extensively in Himachal and Uttarakhand for technology business incubation. I have helped start Catalyst, which is a technology business incubator, the first of its kind at IIT Mandi, which was formed with DST, Himachal government, and few other benefactors. In last about 5 years, we have probably incubated close to 70 to 80 startups there in varied fields. And I've also had very close association with Naropa Fellowship, which Karthik just mentioned. So my experience of probably having seen close to 500 sort of pitches, business plans, at various stages, startups in different sectors is where I'm coming from and what I will say. So that's really, my background to talk about entrepreneurship. The areas that we have focused on, before I come to the topic of Swadeshi and localization, I think the areas that I just want to talk a little bit about where we have focused from a technology perspective. We have focused on things that are closer to, Himalayan region. When we started this incubator, Catalyst, we said we want to support startups that are either for Himalayan region or from Himalayan region. And we started looking at areas like disaster management, road safety, clean technology, electric vehicles, mobility. We started exploring concepts of permaculture and biomimicry and influencing startups, from those thought processes, really. We wanted to be more forward thinking. I think Mr. Mahajan spoke about livelihood. I think Shrikant also spoke about, 25 lakhs, 1,000 jobs. That's been one of our focus as an incubator, that how do we, it should not be linear. Our investment should, create more impact. They should be relevant socially. And how can we, even if we apply artificial intelligence and machine learning, how is it not applied to the wrong businesses, but it is applied to the right businesses? Why don't we apply it to agriculture? Why don't we apply it to skill development? Why don't we apply it to, waste management? How do we explore indigenous varieties of crops, native crops that are coming out of Himalayan region, and do something with those crops that they become more relevant for consumers consumers to pick it up from the market. So that's been the focus. And going back to this whole concept of Swadeshi, what I really want to say is that I think it's important to deal with that word of Swadeshi and localization with a lot of consciousness. We have to understand the ethos of it and guard against the whole sort of xenophobic sentiment that it can give rise to in very many ways when we call for Swadeshi. Our training and last 100 years of what we have done is been pretty global. I mean, the outlook has to be global. Our training has been global. So why don't we approach, for me, Swadeshi, for instance, would perhaps mean local wisdom, indigenous knowledge, mindfulness of carbon, footprint that I'm creating as a business. It would be about environmental sensibility. It would be about sustainability. So that is what, Swadeshi for me means. Swadeshi does not mean that I close my borders. I don't produce things that, cannot be consumed outside. But yes, mindfulness. So I should not be producing, for instance, where I'm importing something in Leh Ladakh, processing it in Leh Ladakh, and then putting it back on the road or on aircrafts to sell it back in, Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, and stamping it, saying this is a Himalayan produce. I think from a branding, we spoke about marketing and branding. We started selling everything in the name of Himalayas. And I think that is wrong. So the context is important, and the context has to be local. What I would say is, in my opinion, perhaps misplaced is this whole homogenization of production, consumption, expectations, and the experience. So we should get away from this homogenization, which we have started expecting and experiencing. What are businesses and enterprises supposed to do? Are they for the people or are they for the pocket? I think that sort of clarity we have to have as people who nurture the next league of businesses, next league of entrepreneurs who are going to come. And and someone spoke about conscious capitalism, and however philosophical it may sound, I think Karthik was talking about it. But we have to think about that. And let me, just pick up some examples. If we were to talk about, and some of you may be very well exposed to architecture and building. Why should I, think about? Swadeshi makes a lot of sense in architecture and building. I should be, consuming local material to build, buildings which are eco-sensitive. Why should I build a building in which I have to put, air conditioners when the climate is such that you do not need air conditioning? But at the same time, let's take a contrasting example of, coconuts, for instance. I cannot produce coconuts here, but I have to import coconuts from, South India for whatever my needs for coconuts are. So I have to be very conscious of, what I am doing and what is the impact of it on the entire ecosystem that is around me. And within that, the Swadeshi term has to be applied. On the market side, on the side of what's happening with branding, how do you create linkages, etc. I think this whole sort of movement, and in last 4 or 5 years we've already felt it, that digital has been fabulous. Digital has given unprecedented access. I think Vijay spoke about that. We should look at well done and land as a resource. We have been talking about what kind of technology businesses that we can create. We do not want to bring the technology business that would bring all the problems of technology businesses that came to the urban centers. We do not want the traffic in Himalayan region. We want to be very sensitive of what the carbon footprint of these businesses are going to be. But perhaps, setting up, high-tech labs where the impact is very high of, what you are being able to do with those high-tech labs. Talking about server farms, the landscape, the climate, the land, the terrain actually is very conducive, to do some of those things. Why can't we attract investment in that? Why can't, if, we can think of Silicon Valley, we've been saying, why can't we think of something like Kamand Valley? IIT Mandi is based in a valley called Kamand, about, 15, 20 kilometers from Mandi town, and it's got access to the best of the labs, the best of the technical faculty, and you can necessarily build businesses like those there. There is a new talk. Sorry,
we're running out of time.
Sorry. Yes, I'll just wrap up. So I think I saw some questions which are coming there, and people were talking about.
We'll pick up the questions later.
Okay. So just to wrap up with the last point, there is a new technology innovation hub which is being set up for human-computer interfaces. So I would just wrap it up by saying science and technology, where it makes most sense, being sensitive to the local context. And as far as the market linkages, brandings are concerned, I don't think that is an issue at all, given the new digital age that we are living in currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you. There will be time for question and answer, but let us immediately go to Ved. Ved, the cornerstone for all ecosystems or any other institutional build-up will depend on capability building. And this is the human resource and culture and all that, is to be taken into account. Over to you in this building of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So Ved. With your mic.
Yeah. Can I show some slides? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. P.D. Rai, and thank you, Mr. Sushil Ramola. I will take a few minutes to describe some of the things that we are doing in the what we call Buddha Fellowship Program. And since a lot of people today are talking about technology, maybe some of what I say may be relevant in terms of what kind of people can we bring. I also want to subscribe and endorse what Mr. P.D. Rai was saying, that we have this climate change is a big issue, and Himalayan region faces it more than the plains, and therefore what kind of economic or enterprise model can be built which does not further destroy our mountains and the ecosystem there. So although we will not have time to talk about today about how we can build local economy and where the returning migrants can play a huge role, and that is local economy which actually will reduce a carbon footprint. Maybe this time to go back and do this kind of a Swadeshi model, that there is local production and local consumption that Elaben Bhatt often talks about. So let me show you the presentation just to bring to bear some of the experience over the Himalayan region. None of this experience I'm going to show is from the Himalayan region, but what we have tried to do so far is to bring people from IITs and IIMs. I'm assuming now there will be sort of more opportunity to recruit them, given the market for the jobs also has sort of drastically changed. But this one gives you, shows you some of them who are with us. So as you can see, there are a number of people who have graduated from IIMs and have taken the path of entrepreneurship. It shows the potential, including from IIT Mandi or IIM Kashipur, that such people rather choose the path of job creators than choose the path of only job seekers in McKinsey or such companies. And I would argue later on that they could actually work better if we, as mezzanine entrepreneurs, if we could bring in now a returning migrant as a village or a micro entrepreneur, hand in hand, they can do a much better job. So quickly, what results we've got so far? It's a 1.5-year-old program. Just to these are the kind of impact we have been able to show. This example is from the Buddha entrepreneur who's been aggregating custard apple and making pulp out of it, frozen pulp, to sell it to ice cream companies. All of us are familiar with custard apple ice cream. And overall, in this period, they were able to raise 3 crore rupees. Not much in context of what Karthik was talking about, but nonetheless, this is a performance in 1.5 years or so by these entrepreneurs. And we are building these B2B models, etc., etc. Now, I was asked that how we can build capacities. Before that, I talk about the 4-stage model. I want to say that there are lots of NGOs, civil society organizations that are interested in entrepreneurs. They have done a huge amount of work in terms of self-help groups that are ubiquitous. There are crores of SHGs, and Vijay mentioned something like 1.4 crore. Then we have 14 crore women. This is a social capital, and many of them have aggregated themselves and built FPOs. So one part of the work that NGOs have done, can we bring now the entrepreneurs with this education? They can bring technology, they can understand the markets. So this example on the left is that of BIF. Girish Sohani is the president, and Ravi is an IIM Kashipur graduate. He's the entrepreneur. What is he doing? So Girish had been working on this project for 10 years of biodiversity. He was trying to conserve the genetic potential of in the villages of rice varieties, etc. But had the grant collapsed, or once the grant collapsed, the project would have also stopped. So he asked us, entrepreneur, to make it sustainable. So Ravi went, and Ravi also wanted to work on biodiversity, and he built this Farming Monk brand. So I'll not go further. This is another example in gig economy, since we commercial entrepreneurs, Vijay was talking about. This another place where Medha is building this gig economy through skill building, and he has as an lawyer. She is an IIT Kharagpur graduate. She recently won about 60 lakh rupees to take this model forward. So the model that I'm going to describe can very well be applied to returning migrants. First thing what we do is immersion to test the so-called empathy in the person, because many times people have this role working in the villages. So we take them through immersion. Then we ask them to try, if they have an idea, they want to build an enterprise, they should go through a pilot. And thus we want to test their ability to execute, because there is a lot of ideation at times. Also, there is a belief in some people that, I've got a bright idea. When push comes to shove, they are not able to execute, and they are not able to produce the proof of concept. Then they go through the third stage. In fact, first two have become now selection stages for us. Then once they've got a proof of concept, we put them in NGO if they are okay with this, working with an NGO, because that's got a social capital in terms of SHGs, or they would have built up some kind of aggregation model in the FPOs. In this sense, entrepreneur is not yet ready to take full risk, so he or she works like the two examples I gave previously. And the final stage is that of an entrepreneur who is really independent. So Farming Monk is an example of the pilot. FarmVeda is an example of a company where one of the Buddha fellow works, the ownership is with somebody else. And this is the last one, which is on the custard apple value chain. I just don't want to spend more time, but I want to say what is the ecosystem we are building. We are an enabler, which is something that Srikant Sastry also was referring to. They need technology experts. So we bring those people from our contacts. This is an example of Pavnik Kohli, who's a cold chain expert. Then they need access to labs and facilities and mentors. So we have a tie-up with IIT Kanpur, and NSR Center for Entrepreneurship Learning in IIM Bangalore. Then we have also tied up with JSS Incubator as well as with Deshpande Foundation's work in Hubli. Then they look for loans, favorite subject, Mr. Vijay Mahajan. So we have been fortunate in getting loans for Buddha Fellows from FWWB and looking to get loans from Ministry Bank. Of course, situation will change drastically as we go forward in COVID times. Then this other thing I said, this is a host institution that we have. And then finally, we can get government money, government resources like Prime Minister Vandan Yojana is supporting the custard apple project. So these are the 5, what should I say, partners, institutions that we can relate. Lessons for for Indian Himalayan region could be that could we choose among, if we did migrant profiling from among the returning migrants, not all of them will work on NREGA as many people are advocating. Many of them will have education, they are the breadwinners, they have as the WhatsAppias, as Vijay said. So can we choose among them who are more risk takers and take them through the 4-stage model, and then we build an ecosystem of the kind that we built for the Buddha Fellows.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Ved.
much.
I think, thank you very much, Ved. I think an excellent presentation. This presentation, if you can share it, it'll be wonderful so that we can put it up on our website as well.
Yes, thank you.
So that it can be shared with others. Now we come to a very interesting part of our segment in which we will request those of our governing council members who are with us. So I'll first call on Dr. Lalbiak, who's from Mizoram. Dr. Lalbiak is an architect and he runs an architecture firm in Mizoram, a very successful one at that. So you have just a minute or two to make a point or ask a question, Dr. Lalbiak. Are you there?
Yes, very much, sir.
Yeah, very excellent.
Good evening. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the panelists for the excellent presentation. Many of them are very eye-opener to all of us. I think like some of the points which was shared by Mr. Srikanth in the beginning, I think we need to take a lot of it further, and we have to trickle it down so that we can make use of that in the local context. And also that Mr. Vijay Mahajan, the post-COVID scenario, the importance of health sector and also the outsourcing sector. I think that can be made use a lot, especially the outsourcing, because the villages and the rural areas in the IHR are relatively very safe and healthy. So instead of going back to the metropolitan cities and other places, if we can really work on outsourcing and work from home, so that like post-COVID, you don't need to go to the cities, pay a lot for your rent and others, and you can just feel at home and do the work that you've been doing. And I think a lot of takeaways in those two, and the others also there. But so I think, given the time that I have, I think I'll not go into deep into the other details. But the outsourcing sectors, digital jobs for the rural youth and the people around us, I think that needs to be taken care of.
Excellent, Lalveji. You're catching all the points very well. Now, can I request Dr. Vincent Darlong? Is Dr. Vincent Darlong there? He's the Vice Chancellor of the Martin Luther University, Christian University in Shillong. Dr. Vincent Darlong?
Good evening and thank you. I'd like to
have just a minute or two.
Okay. Thank you all to the panelists. Excellent presentation. They were really, high, ambitious, enterprise-based let's say, activities. Over the last 1.5 months, in our own university, we have been following up on the traditional rural entrepreneurship, what is happening to the rural communities. It so happened that in the Northeast, majority of the rural communities in the Himalayan areas are dependent on farming system agriculture. Okay. And the lockdown coincided with sowing season. Now, in the project that I have been associated earlier, IFAD funded, now funded by NEC, we were following up with some of the villages. Wherever we have introduced high yielding varieties, the farmers suffered greatly because the seeds were coming from outside. They couldn't get seed. But traditional seed growers, those who depended on the local food varieties and seeds, they had no problem at all, So families and villages who had traditional crops had no issues, and also those who had dependent loss on forest-based livelihood, they have no issues at all. Now, what I'm trying to say basically here is that we still have to depend on all these traditional, agrobiodiversity in order to support livelihood, as we have mentioned. For them, for the communities, enterprise or entrepreneurship is really having enough food to eat or growing enough food for themselves, not dependent on the market. So I'm just trying to say that while we support all the type of entrepreneurship that has been mentioned, given the kind of situation that we have in the Northeast, especially Eastern Himalayas, another 30 seconds, it is very, very important that we continue to promote the local varieties in order to support the communities by themselves. And by this, there has also been resurgence of social capital. Many of the families who had seeds also gave seeds to their other neighbors. And the traditional institution came into great, role in order to, see that every farmers got the seed, because sowing season has to be maintained. Otherwise, they'll not have food for the next year. So entrepreneurship for these communities are basically practicing agriculture in the right way in the local tradition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Darlong. Then now I would like to introduce Mr. Alim Temshi Jamir from Nagaland, who was the former Chief Secretary of the state, and also today holds a very key position in the to bring in investments into Nagaland. Mr. Jamir, can you take the floor, please?
Okay. Can you all see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, very much.
Okay. Yeah. The presentations was really eye-opening, and I think it's very timely because right now in Nagaland, what we are trying to do is how to harness the energies of all the, the say reverse migrants coming back to Nagaland. So far, about 18,000 of them have registered to come back, and then we're slowly starting. Now, we were applying our minds as to how we can gainfully use this, the energies of these people and take the opportunity to also retain them in Nagaland instead of them moving out, because there are a lot of the opportunities here, and that is exactly what the speakers have touched upon. And I think by taking on the points which have been raised by them, educated and then experienced people, and especially the savvy, techno-savvy people who are coming back into Nagaland, I think we can make an impact on the economy. And that's a paper which I was writing since yesterday, and it'll be very helpful if we could get the 3-4 panelists who have spoken today, if we could get their papers.
Yeah, the transcripts. Yeah,
if we get the transcripts or the presentations which they have given, and which we could share perhaps with our government, so that we can transfer our thinking, the IMI thinking, into the government policies, and it will be really very good and helpful.
Excellent.
I mean, that's the basic, the first reaction that I have. Yeah.
Thank you, Alimji. I think you've really, it gives us a lot of thought, food for thought. Now, can I request Priya? Is Priya around? Priya Darshani Shrestha?
Yes,
She's
I'm here.
the head, Priya, she's the head of the World WWF in Sikkim. So over to you, Priya, your question or any comment?
Thank you, sir. And thank you all the panelists. I think it was really good to listen to all the wonderful work that's happening, and just to kind of make a comment. Also, I think to refer to what Mr. Ramola also mentioned right at the beginning about women entrepreneurship, and somehow that seems to be missing, and I think also in these webinars, they are now calling it as the manel, where it is mostly men. So I think it's also obvious, I think, from the set of panel that we have here, that there seems to be this missing thing about women's involvement. So how do we, moving forward, see that, for the future? But also to listen to most of the panelists, I think the experiences were more from the Western Himalaya sector, and it seems the Eastern, or even if I look back at Sikkim and the Darjeeling region where I'm mostly based, this kind of entrepreneurship models are only just emerging for this region, or there's almost a large absence, I would say, So I don't know. Going forward in the COVID situation, what this region would look like in the future, and how we could learn from the other regions of the mountains, I think is there are many lessons, I think, there especially for the northeastern side. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe one of the panelists can take your question or your comment and refer to that. Now, next we have Fantri Minjaswal. Madam Fantri, do you have a comment? And she's the secretary of the Integrated Mountain Initiative, as well as a former IRS officer who rose to the pinnacle of the IRS. Madam? Fantri? Not there?
Fantri is on mute. I think, yeah. Fantri, you are on mute.
I think there's an issue with the audio connection here.
So shall we move to Dr. Gopal Rawat? Dr. Gopal Rawat is a professor at the WII, I think, Wildlife Institute.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, my compliments to all the learned panelists for excellent presentations. My question is more directed towards Mr. Ved Arya, who gave an excellent stepwise entrepreneurship development, 4 stages of development. We know that different sectors and different areas of entrepreneurship development will take different time. But when it comes to let us say implementing certain schemes which government has already allocated, or there are funds available. For example, in the sector of medicinal plant cultivation, government has just announced that there will be 4,000 crore rupees as a special package for herbal cultivation, and 5,000 crore rupees worth income will be generated in 2 years or so. But this entire sector, we know that the technologies are not developed, the different stakeholders are not organized, and even if there is some capacity, but the actual people who need jobs, their capacity development itself may take more than 2-3 years, and then they in between they lose interest, or sometimes things fail, and just speedy allocation of funds, and then trying to justify it sometimes backfires. So that is one major concern, how to deal with such things given our unemployable youth and disinterested, or people in the youth in the mountains, have they lost the dignity of labor. Those who have gone back from cities, big cities, like from hotel industry and so on, they may or may not really feel really dignified to work in the fields, in the farms and so on. So that is one concern I have. Another very small query towards Mr. Mittal is, I was unable to catch what exactly is the biomimicry and how does it work in the mountain context. Thank you so much.
So is Fantry back? Thank you, Dr. Rawat. Is Fantry there?
Audio is still connecting.
It's still a problem. Okay. Is it still a problem?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So now from here, I will request Mr. Ramola to take over and ask a few questions along with whatever the 2 points that have come up from Dr. Gopal Rawat and perhaps from Priyadarshini, so that you can take it forward from there. Over to you, Sushil.
Sushil, you're on mute.
Sushil?
Yes. Yeah. Once again, thank you very much, panelists. And I think our IMI governing council members also have chipped in beautifully to provide the context to this discussion. I think many of the questions which I have received here have been responded to in the course of this conversation. But I would like to, apart from these 2 questions asked from Mr. Ved Arya and Mr. Mittal, who they can respond to, I would like to, I think after they respond, I would like to ask a question, which is a kind of a generalized question, is that, in the mountain region, we have a lot of natural resources. Forest produce was talked about, and Dr. Rawat talked about herbal medicinal plants. How can we really use these natural resources, which are almost free? How can we use them in our villages and to rebuild the village economy? What kind of enterprises are required, and what does IMI need to do? That's the question being posed by a couple of people. What can IMI do to build that? And I would say that is the 3rd question, and that should be to anyone who wants to answer. So I would like to start with, I think, Mr. Ved Arya, who has asked a question by Dr. Rawat, and then Dr. Mittal.
Yeah, thank you, Sushil. Thank you, Mr. P.D. Rai. Let me quickly say to Ms. Priyadarshini that one of the 7 Buddha fellows is a woman. So it's no complete absent from, at least from the entrepreneurial, whatever, we have the ensemble we had. So 1:7, of course, not a great ratio. We should have 4 out of 7 rather than even 3 out of 7. So I think there is a huge need to bring more and more women entrepreneurs. And when we work with SHG leaders, many of them have actually converted them into entrepreneurs. If you know of the model of community resource persons, what we call Pashu Sakhis, they do an excellent job, and I can separately, bilaterally also tell you more stories. Sushil has seen also in the district of Tonk how they even uneducated, so to say, not formally educated women make up for a great paravets than even college going girls. So that point I think I wanted to make, and we should look out more and more women entrepreneurs from any institute as we go out. Now to the second point, the question Dr. Gopal Rawat asked about herbal medicine. I think the point, as I understood, is that are there technologies available for processing, first of all production as well for processing, to make it into a viable enterprise. There are processing technologies, as one of our Buddha fellows is using for custard apple, making it a frozen pulp. This was initially innovated by a professor in a college of agriculture in Udaipur. So I think, and there are other industrial entrepreneurs who are just into drying and processing. There is IHR, Indian Institute of Horticulture Research, person and who's heading Agri Innovate. I was with her in a webinar organized by NSR Cell in Bangalore. So there are people who can give us technologies at a micro level, which will increase the, even IIT Kanpur has technology which will increase the shelf life to 4 weeks to 6 weeks for vegetables, etc. So I think there is an ample opportunity for young returning migrants. Not necessarily they have to work in the villages and not as the farms, but they can work as base level entrepreneurs along with these Buddha, along with more educated. Have I adequately answered the question?
Yeah, I think, we'll move on. Thanks, Wade. Yeah, to Dr. Mittal.
Thank you, Sushil. I think there are 2 or 3 things which come to my mind when we talk about how do we use the flora and fauna of Himalayan region, what this region is abundant in, and how do we use it for our livelihood, for actually benefiting people. I think 2, 3 things come to my mind. One is that we should really rethink the model of entrepreneurship, our expectations as people who support and nurture entrepreneurs. It doesn't have to be for scale, which is what I was re-emphasizing earlier, that we have to reimagine entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to produce a lot of money. It is for people. It is not for the pocket. That is one thing that we have to make clear in our head, I think, because the markets are not huge, and whatever we will start will be small in that scheme of things. The second is technology, connection with technology. There's a lot of research happening in the lab, but that is not being able to come out. It is embedded in papers and it is getting lost. For instance, I'll give you an example. Pine needles, pine forests are there in Himachal, and pine needles are actually a big problem because they catch fire in summers. And at IIT Mandi, pine needles were being processed to make bricks and pellets, which could actually be used as fuel in stoves. We have another startup which is working in Uttarakhand, which is which is collecting grass from the forest and converting that into a fiber. It's a cellulosic fiber, a natural fiber, something like jute and cotton, organic cotton. And that's a great example of how you can get something which is just growing and get people to collect it, tribal communities to collect it, and convert it into something which is very meaningful, livelihood oriented. So there are many examples I can give like that, which we have explored in last about 4 or 5 years. And I think the connection between technology, research, what needs to come out, that connection needs to be made. The third thing which I would say what IMI can potentially do is, since IMI is a nodal body connecting across all the Himalayan states, if it could create some sort of a central repository of sorts, if it could actually get people together on these. I mean, if let's say I was to come back to Himachal today and I have some technical capability, I may have know-how as well about what's available around me, and I want to start a business. I have no idea. So could IMI actually make sure that we create, by going across incubators, going across organizations, both private, public, governmental organizations, and create some sort of a forum or a repository where people could go to and say, okay, I can access an idea here. I can potentially access someone who could fund it. I could also access mentorship, and maybe they can help me get into an incubator through this, where I could work on this particular idea. So IMI could become the facilitator of sorts in making this happen for opportunities that are specifically related to what's available in Himalayan region, I would say.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think the third question which I had raised is, was that how do we use the natural resources and forest produce the best way in the villages, and particularly I would add to that, using women's energy through SHGs or through FPOs or through as individual entrepreneurs. So I think I would request Vijay to maybe take that on. How can we create that kind of get this prosperity out of what we have lying waste? And tourism is also an example of that category, where the natural resources are the assets which are kind of lying waste. So how can we use that, and especially for rural entrepreneurship?
So I'd like to keep this very specific and taking advantage of the fact of what Mr. Alanteshi Jamir said, that 18,000 young Nagaland young people have registered to come back to the state. Most of them have worked in places like Bangalore and Delhi and so on, have excellent, understanding of the outside world. So they are back and they need employment, and hopefully some of them will become entrepreneurs. So I would in fact suggest Sushil and PD, and we can discuss this offline, that let's treat this as a great opportunity, and specifically for the case of Nagaland, since Mr. Jamir is also in charge of trying to bring in investments, let's identify out of these 18,000 through psychometric tests, maybe 180, 1%, who have entrepreneurial traits and who have the right skill and experience mix, and match them with the resources, the surplus resources which are wasted, as you were saying, Sushil. And they're captured in my water, energy, land, and livelihood. And we can, within each of these, there's a sub list, but we could sort of then work on specific entrepreneurial ideas, the kind that Ved mentioned, for example. Custard apple used to sell for like 10 rupees a basket in the kind of areas where it is now being processed and sold to ice cream making companies at a much higher value added. So there is enough experience in this panel itself, in this discussion itself, panel and your board members, for us to actually now move from theoretical conversations to specific action plan. And I would say that the moment we start doing that, we will get very concrete. In other words, I'm saying that we need to now, though there is this COVID restriction, but we need to move from maybe webinars to web do some things, or whatever is possible. I'm sort of itching to move from talk to action.
Yeah, I think on that happy note, since the time is limited, I had a couple of other questions, and one of them was, how do we build really partnerships? So one last thing, PD, if you permit me, I would like to ask people who have not responded, like Shrikant, how do we build now the partnership, and how can IMI play a role in building those partnerships? So I would like to ask that from Shrikant and
and Karthik.
And Karthik. I think you can, how can we build it?
So this should actually be the easier of things for IMI to do, because I pick up these partnership opportunities when I travel to different incubators or institutions and I talk to people and I figure out that someone here needs something that someone else somewhere else has. I think if it can be done in a more structured way, since you have people across the Himalayan states, for us to quickly build a simple list and a portal where I am looking for so-and-so, I can offer so-and-so. A simple partnership matchmaking kind of thing. And this would be actually the easiest thing to do, because in times like this, people realize that resources are limited and they need to partner. So you should have a good response to this actually.
Excellent. Karthik?
Yes, no, thank you very much. I think, look, what you are hosting here itself is a great example of a partnership. So I think, as I was saying, tri-sector collaboration is the key to success. So IMI, I think, has a good platform to bring the different stakeholders together. what Saurabh was suggesting about the database and the facilitation role, or if you guys have a list of directory of all the projects and the key stakeholders in different states, that is a very valuable thing to potentially then bring at least investors or impact investors as the next stage of partners. Because, like I said, there definitely is interest from philanthropists and different pools of capital to look at exactly these issues in these regions. So IMI can play a very good convening role by bringing them together and doing, as Vijay was suggesting, moving from just the discussion to sharing specific proposals of what's happening in different states and where funding is needed, and maybe putting all of that online. And then more and more people can join on to that.
Okay. So thank you very much. We'll respond to other questions and suggestions offline. So I'd like to hand over back to Mr. P.D. Rai.
Yeah, thank you, Sushil, and thanks to all the panelists, to all our members of the Governing Council, to all those who have joined us today evening from amongst our state chapters, as well as those who have joined from across the country. I'd like to thank each and every one of them. And we have not, we've just made a real beginning, and I completely second the view of Mr. Vijay Mahajan saying that let's take it into action. And I can see Alim Tenshiji there. Maybe Alim, this is the time. This is the moment that you are looking for. And if you want, we should talk offline on this immediately. Thank you all very much, and we can close this particular session. This was part of our Meet of the Mountain States, and I think we'll be having a few more such like webinars in the times to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sushil. Thanks, PD.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, PD. Yeah, thanks very much.